Okay, before we begin the general discussion, I do want to remind you that you should read the assigned reading before coming to class. Otherwise, as you know today, you'll have no idea what's going on. And this is even more important for the second half of the semester because we're going to be reading one book. For the first half, if you miss a week, that's fine. You have a new chance the next week. But if we're reading one book and you miss 1 week, you're not going to understand the later weeks either. So this is even more important if you want to do well on the final exam. Yes. Okay. So uh, I did manage to talk with all of you about these questions. So let's see what you guys think. The first question, the idea that especially the white people uh, are able to take power because of their better guns, not necessarily because they're better people. So Nwamba, this group says, ends up agreeing. As we see in the story, she brings her son to learn from the white people, not because she thinks that the white people's ideas are better, but because she can see that the white people are starting to take power. And so she wants her son to be able to deal with and use the people in authority for his own benefit. So she's sending her son off because basically the white people have better guns. Um, and we don't really have an objective standard of judgment from Nwamba about whether the white people are better. She's too much part of her own culture to be able to judge between cultures. But the story itself does seem to give us some kind of judgment. First of all, I think this group also thinks that the author agrees that the white people had better guns. But whether the white people are actually better in terms of morality and culture, there is one moment in the story where we have a direct comparison. This is on page 73. So this is a story that Nwamba hears about a guy who was kidnapped and about to be sold to the white people as a slave. And as these people were being moved, there was in a long human column, there was one woman among them. She shouted herself hoarse, telling the abductors that they were heartless, that her spirit would torment them and their children, that she knew she was to be sold to the white man. And did they not know that the white man's slavery was very different? That people were treated like goats, taken on large ships a long way, and eventually eaten. So from this, we see that the Igbos and other local villages also have a form of slavery, but that it's not as bad as the way that the white people enslave people. So here we have a direct comparison showing that the white culture, in this case, is worse. We also have later moments where, especially Grace's first husband tells her that uh, her own Igbo culture is not worth studying. Page 79. Uh, Her husband George Chikadibia told her she was misguided to write about primitive culture instead of a worthwhile topic like African alliances in the American-Soviet tension. So this is, of course, an idea that comes from white culture that the only history worth writing is about so-called civilized culture, and that local African culture is not civilized, it is primitive. Um, and for this reason, among others, Grace divorces him. I think we can agree that in this story, Grace is presented as a positive figure. And so her husband and his idea is therefore presented as a negative person and a negative idea. So the story here also seems to suggest that this white idea of civilized versus primitive culture is also not a better idea, that the culture that comes up with this idea is not a better culture. Okay, do you have other thoughts about question 1? Okay, let's move on to question 2. Why do the Catholic missionary teachers use so much corporal punishment? So let's begin on 74, actually. So Nwamba first takes Anikwenwa to an Anglican mission. This is the Church of England, which is not Catholic, it's a Reformation church. But she decides, first of all, she noticed that the instruction was done in Igbo. Nwamba asked the first teacher why. He said that, of course, the students were taught English. He held up the English primer. A primer is a textbook. But children learn best in their own language, and the children in the white man's land were taught in their own language too. Nwamba turned to leave. The teacher stood in her way and told her that the Catholic missionaries were harsh and did not have the best interests of the natives at heart. Well, he says this, but he also still uses the word native, which today we don't use as a noun. We think of this as a discriminating term, a discriminatory term when used as a noun. You can say native people, but you shouldn't say native. So, okay, and Nwamba goes to the Catholics, and then on 75, it says, Nwamba was alarmed by how indiscriminately the missionaries flogged students or beat students for being late, for being lazy, for being slow, for being idle. And once, as Anikwenwa told her, Father Lutz had put metal cuffs around a girl's wrists to teach her a lesson about lying. All the time saying in Igbo, for Father Lutz spoke a broken brand of Igbo, that native parents pampered their children too much, and teaching the gospel also meant teaching proper discipline. So Father Lutz beats the children. His reason is because they need discipline. And he's mainly thinking about students being late, lazy, slow, idle, and lying. So I talked with a group about this behavior from the children, and they thought that maybe it's not all for a negative reason. Like, what does it mean for someone, for example, to be late? It means that they have agreed to show up at a certain time, and when the time comes, they're not here. But do the Igbo villagers use the same concept of time as a Western missionary? At this point in Western history, the West has industrialized. They have trains, they have timetables, and standard time. The Igbo village does not. So if Father Lutz says, okay, let's meet at 8 o'clock, and he looks at his watch and it's 8, the Igbo children are looking at the sun. And when you look at the sun or the sundial or like a sun clock, there's very little difference between like 8 and 8:01. That's not something that's part of their culture of time. So what Father Lutz considers being late, the Igbo children may have a different idea of what it means to be late. Their idea of time is not as precise as industrialized time. The same could be said for ideas of being lazy, slow, and idle. Like, what does that mean? What are the children doing? This group says maybe they're just not reading or writing or listening to the teacher. Maybe they're daydreaming. Maybe they're resting. In other words, maybe they're being human. But Father Lutz draws his morality from the Bible, right? It says teaching the gospel also meant teaching discipline. And Christianity as a religion is what we call a transcendental religion. It exists outside of this world. These values are absolute values. Another way to say this is that it is an inhuman religion. The ideas don't care about your human situation. No matter what, you should try to follow the Bible and religious teachings. So, from that perspective, no matter what the children are doing, if it's not what they're supposed to be doing, according to Father Lutz, then they are lazy, slow, and idle. We can even say something similar about lying. Of course, the Bible does say something similar to like you shouldn't lie, especially not to a priest. But we all lie in daily life, and we lie for reasons that we think justify the lie. I think most of us don't lie for no reason, right? There's always some kind of reason. But instead of figuring out what the reason is and trying to educate this student about a better way to deal with that reason, he simply punishes her and calls that a lesson. So compared to the Anglican teacher, it does seem like the Catholic idea of what is best for a local person does not care too much about the actual situation of the students in this case. And what makes it really ironic is that Father Lutz does speak Igbo a little bit. Like, in order to spread the gospel, he has learned about the local culture, but he doesn't use that knowledge to help teach his students. And so the same attitude that thinks these things about his students, that doesn't take into consideration cultural differences, the same attitude could justify violence and corporal punishment against those students. If Father Lutz thinks that he is absolutely correct and that the students are absolutely wrong, then there's no reason to stop from hitting them. You don't hit someone. The reason we don't hit people is because we think of them as fellow human beings who have their own feelings and ideas, and so we respect that. But if Father Lutz doesn't see them as equal in dignity and respect, there's nothing to stop him from beating them. And so the fact that he beats these students shows us his attitude towards their culture. Okay, do you have other thoughts about this question? Well, we can also talk about why is it the Catholic priest who beats the children, whereas the Anglican priest is more respectful of their culture. And it's probably related to the fact that the Anglican Church is a Reformed church. So they split from the Catholic Church. In their ceremonies, they don't use Latin, they use English. And their ideas and religious practices slowly have changed over time to better fit the needs of the English people. In other words, they respect the people that they are teaching to and that they are preaching to. And so that is also reflected in their attitude toward local students. Okay, question 3. Why is the foreign Father O'Donnell more polite than Aniquenwa? So this is on page 77. When Aniquenwa's wife breaks a taboo and is beaten by the local women, Aniquenwa is very mad and threatened to lock up all the elders if his wife was treated that way again. But Father O'Donnell, on his next trek from his station in Onitsha, visited the elders and apologized on Mbeke's behalf. Mbeke is Aniquenwa's wife, the one who broke the rule, and asked whether perhaps Christian women could be allowed to fetch water fully clothed. The elders refused, If one wanted Oyi's waters, Oyi is the name of the river goddess, then one had to follow Oyi's rules. But they were courteous to Father O'Donnell, who listened to them and did not behave like their own son, Anikwenwa. So the question is, why is Father O'Donnell so polite, even though he's a white guy, whereas Anikwenwa, who was born in the village, is not? So I talked with a couple of groups about this question, and they both agree that it's related to the fact that Father O'Donnell is an outsider with a different culture, whereas Anikwenwa started life as an insider, but has gravitated toward the outside, has taken up a set of different culture. So the idea I heard from these groups is that Father O'Donnell knows that he doesn't belong to this culture. He knows that he's a guest, and guests should be polite. He has enough life experience to know no matter what you think about the other person, if you are a guest, if you don't know them well, you should remain polite. At the same time, he has his religious belief. And as a priest, I think we can all agree that he thinks his religious belief is correct and better than whatever the local people believe. So he is secure in his own belief. He doesn't feel the need to always be lecturing other people all the time. It's kind of like he knows he's right, and so he knows that the universe will side with him sooner or later. It doesn't have to be now. A related idea I heard was that because of his sense of correctness, he wants to set a good moral example as well. And so he's performing that idea of being respectful and morally upright. On the other hand, Anikwenwa was converted to Christianity. So maybe he still feels a sense of inferiority about his original culture, the local culture. Maybe he feels the need to always demonstrate that his new ideas are better than the old ones. He needs to always prove that he made the right choice. And especially because he was born in this local culture, he feels like he has to try hard to distinguish himself from everybody else, to show himself as an outsider, as a better outsider. And so he's always going around lecturing people. He's always saying, no, you should do this instead of that. Precisely because he was born as an insider. In religious terms, we call Anikwenwa's behavior the zeal of the newly converted. This is something we often see in people who change religions. When they come into their new religion, they feel the need to work hard to prove that they make the correct choice and that they are doing the correct things. Zeal means passion or energy. Okay, do you have other thoughts about question 3? All right, question 4. The long penultimate paragraph repeats the phrase, it was Grace who would. Why does it do this? What effect does this have? So let's just look at a few examples. So this section, Nwamba feels like she's about to die. Grace also feels like Nwamba is about to die. So she comes to see her grandmother. And then this new paragraph, it was Grace who would read about these savages, titillated by their curious and meaningless customs, not connecting them to herself until her teacher, Sister Maureen, told her she could not refer to the call and response her grandmother had taught her as poetry because primitive tribes did not have poetry. It was Grace who would laugh loudly until Sister Maureen took her to detention and then summoned her father, who slapped Grace in front of the teachers to show them how well he disciplined his children. It was Grace who would nurse a deep scorn for her father for years, spending holidays working as a maid in Onitsha so as to avoid the sanctimonies, the dour certainties of her parents and brother, and so on. So, like, almost every sentence begins with, "It was Grace who would." So, I talked with a group about this, and they felt like the repetition added emphasis, that it made Grace seem important, more important than the other characters, and that it made these events also seem somehow important in a way that the previous events did not feel. Maybe not more important, but a different kind of importance. We have a new perspective on these events, a different perspective. Um, Within that repetition and that emphasis, this phrase is repeated, and because of this repetition, it also makes us feel like the different parts are even more different. In the rest of the story, it's just basically one thing after another. The pace is pretty much the same. It flows smoothly. But here we have an alternating pattern: similarity, difference, similarity, difference. And so between each new event, we have a repetition of the same thing. And that makes each new event feel even more different. And difference upon difference upon difference creates movement and change. So by repeating this phrase, it makes this big long section move faster. It makes the pace speed up. And then finally, related to these two ideas is the grammar. It was Grace who would, not it was Grace who did. Would means the future. It has not yet happened. In fact, when we reach the end of the story, we come back to the present day. But on that day, as she sat at her grandmother's bedside. So, and then it even mentions her future. So this long paragraph has not yet happened. These things are in Grace's future. But we can't know the future. So this long paragraph feels like prophecy, like destiny. And if you have prophecy and you have destiny, then you have some kind of higher power guiding events. In this case, maybe that higher power is not religion. Maybe it is the higher power of the Igbo culture. Maybe it is a higher power called historical justice or progress. But there's something guiding Grace's future so that we can see what she will be doing. And this is that other perspective that I was talking about earlier. Because we have this new higher power guiding Grace's future, we have the story from the perspective of this higher power that we did not have for the rest of the story. And that makes this section feel very different. Previously, most of the story was from Nwamba's perspective, things that she saw, she thought, she experienced. But here, it's not exactly from Grace's experience or perspective. It's from the perspective of the higher power guiding Grace's life. It's a very different feeling from the rest of the story. Or you can even say that the higher power is the author. That also works. You feel the intervention of the author into this historical fictional story. Okay, other thoughts about this question? Finally, question 5. Who do you think the story's title is referring to and why? The title is The Headstrong Historian. So the most obvious answer is it's referring to Grace, because she does grow up to become a professional historian, and she does so because she is stubborn about the value of Igbo culture. When nobody else believed that it had value, she believed it, and she wrote books and presented ideas and did work for charities to show that value to the world. But could we have another answer? Could Nwamba also fit this description as a headstrong historian? I was talking with the group about this question, and while they agree that Nwamba is headstrong, the story itself says that Nwamba is headstrong. She is her family's headstrong daughter. It says on page 69. They disagreed about the idea of historian. Even if we're not talking about professional historians, this group said that a historian should have some thoughts or ideas about events, whereas Nwamba mostly just experienced the events. She made judgments, but they were judgments about people and ideas that she encountered. They weren't really judgments about the flow of human events or society or like a bigger picture idea. And then, of course, Nwamba always believed in her own culture, as most people do. And so she didn't really have a higher level take on what was happening in her culture when the white people came and brought new ideas. This is something that Grace does consider in her own life, but also in her professional work. As we can see from the title of Grace's book, which is called Pacifying with Bullets. So it's not just about what did the Igbo people do and say and believe. It's also about what happened when the white people came. How did that change the Igbo society and culture? So Nwamba is headstrong, but maybe not a historian. Do we have another possible person? What about the author? This is fiction. But even so, could the author be considered a headstrong historian? Once again, we can agree that the author is quite headstrong. She's Nigerian, but she made a name for herself in world literature, writing about the experiences of Nigerian people, Igbo people, and also Nigerian immigrants to the West, which is many people have these experiences, but not everybody becomes world famous for writing about them. So we can agree that she's also quite headstrong. But is she a historian in this story or for this story? With this story? It's fiction, but I think we can tell that it's based on a lot of historical facts. And this group mentioned that even for professional history, a lot of it is subjective. We can all agree on a set of facts, but what do those facts mean? How do they create a picture of the past? How do we understand people in that past? Are all questions of subjective interpretation. So this story is quite subjective, but then again, so is most of history. So it seems like it's not that different. The main difference seems to be we don't know whether the cultural and historical facts in this story are accurate. They seem accurate, but it's also possible, this group said, that the author changed some things to better fit her interpretation of what happened in the past. So for a fiction writer writing about history, it can feel like history. It can even do many things that history does. But there's always a slight difference. We're never sure what is accurate fact. We're never sure what is accurate fact and what is a subjective interpretation. So I guess we can call the author a headstrong quasi-historian or semi-historian. Okay, thoughts about this question or today's discussion? All right, let's take a short break. When we come back, I will survey you to see who else wants a paper copy of the handout for the second half of the semester. Then I'm going to introduce the novel, and then I'm going to introduce the midterm exam. And the exam will begin at noon. Okay, first of all, uh, if you want a paper copy of the handout for the second half of the semester, and you did not raise your hand last week, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I'll put those up at the IC office before this afternoon. Let me write that down. 8 people. Okay, so let me introduce the novel that we are going to read in the second half of the semester. Out of Mesopotamia by Salar Abdoh. Abdoh is Iranian, but he currently teaches in New York. He teaches fiction writing. So from that, we already know a few things about him. He is a professional fiction writer. Like, this is not only what he does in his free time, it's also what he does for his day job. Um, and he has crossed cultures. He has decided not to write only for Iranians, but for a wider readership of people around the world. And that's why he uses English. So Mesopotamia, as I'm sure you know, is the area around Iraq in the Middle East. The story takes place in the 2010s, the late 2010s, during the war or battle against Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So the Islamic State is a terrorist organization that still exists today. In 2014, their leader suddenly declared that they had rightful control over basically all of Islamic territory and over all Muslims around the world, but also especially around the Mediterranean Sea, which of course most people disagreed with that. And also this terrorist group practiced a very extreme form of Islam that most Islamic scholars and rabbis do not feel is justified by Islamic beliefs and the Quran. So they are a religious minority, they are a political minority, and they're terrorists. But they were able to declare that they had such wide territorial control because in 2014, the Middle East was in a lot of chaos. Beginning in 2011, the Middle East saw what's known as the Arab Spring, where local protests started using social media such as Twitter, which was only recently invented, to gain scope and traction and to escalate the protests. And so we had large scale protests around the Middle East, especially in northern Africa. In most countries of the Arab Spring, these protests failed. In a few of them, like Tunisia, they succeeded for a while in reforming the government. In Syria, it descended into civil war. The opposition was strong and united. The government, led by Bashar al-Assad at the time, was authoritarian and unyielding and stubborn. And so the two sides, the protests became violent, violence became organized, the government cracked down. Other countries started supporting rebel groups, especially like the United States and European countries supported rebel groups. Russia supported the government. Things were crazy. Syria is not just filled with Syrians. Even if we only talk about Syrians, there are at least three different sects of Islamic belief uh, prominent in Syria. Bashar al-Assad's family belonged to the minority Alawites, which are an even smaller group than the Shia and the Sunni that we often hear about. And then in the north, you had an even smaller minority of Kurdish people who are not Muslim, but they were like, because of colonial border drawing, they were also like the Kurdish people were split between 3 or 4 different countries, and they don't have a country of their own. So they had been longtime rebels against the Syrian government, and they also joined this civil war as well. So Syria was kind of crazy at the time in around 2011, 2012. And then in 2014, the Islamic State organization founded their major territorial holdings in that area. So it's called the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria because most of their actual territory was in Iraq and Syria. So this map is in 2015 when they held the most territory where they were. So you can see Syria here. This large section is Iraq. And then on the other side of Iraq is Iran. Over here is Turkey. And then below here you have Jordan and Saudi Arabia. I'm naming these countries because all of these countries joined the Syrian civil war in some way. And all of these countries and more joined the fight against Islamic State. So I was talking about how like some countries supported the rebels, other countries supported the government, especially Russia supported the government. But when Islamic State declared that they were going to take over all of the Muslim world, even Russia was like, okay, hang on. First, we got to stop these guys, and then we can go back to our regular fighting. So everybody joined against Islamic State. But, you know, people on two sides of a war working together, they don't always actually work together, right? So there were many reports that Russia said it was bombing Islamic State, but it was actually bombing the rebels, or that it was bombing the parts of the rebels that sided with Islamic State. Yes, did I say that? Some parts of the rebels sided with Islamic State, some because they shared similar extremist beliefs, others because they thought that this would be the fastest way to defeat the Syrian government. So originally you had the rebels versus the government, and then you have Islamic State. It's everybody versus Islamic State and some of the rebels. And then Russia is just bombing everybody. So it's complete chaos. And the majority of Islamic State was defeated in 2017, and the last of its territory was retaken in 2019. But the organization still exists as a terrorist organization. So the novel takes place at the height of this fight against Islamic State. The main character is Iranian. And I should remind you guys that Iranians, the language that they speak is not called Iranian. They speak Persian. Iran is the modern day successor state to Persia, in Chinese, 波斯. And also, because Iran is not an Arabic country, it is a Muslim country, but it is not an Arabic country, right? So they also believe in a form of Islam, but their people's ethnicity is not the same as Arab peoples. They're Persians. So because they're Persians, not Arabs, and because the majority Muslims in Iran are Shiites, whereas in most of the Muslim world, most believers are Sunnis. So a lot of the Muslim world does not really trust Iran. We see this today, in fact, as well, with what's going on in Israel. A lot of Arabic countries who usually say, death to Israel, are kind of hesitant to fully support Hamas against Israel because they feel like that would be helping Iran. And they're even more afraid of Iran than they are of Israel. The Middle East is complicated. So at this moment of the novel, everybody is joining the fight against Islamic State. But in that alliance, people are kind of distrustful of the Iranians. People are thinking about, like, is the West supporting us against IS, or is it supporting us against the government of Syria, or is it supporting us while also helping the government of Syria? And then finally, because the United States invaded Iraq in 2005 or 2003, and they didn't really have a good plan for how to govern Iraq after defeating the Iraqis, into this power vacuum stepped Iran. So despite the fact that Iraq and Iran have been traditional enemies, today Iraq is seen as part of Iranian influence. Like, Iran holds a lot of influence over the Iraqi government, Iraqi policy. So the situation in Iraq is also kind of fluid, but they should be considered part of Iran's sphere of influence. Thoroughly confused yet? So that's the background to this story. And the main character is a journalist and a writer, but he joins the fight against Islamic State as a fighter. And so throughout the story, we'll see him moving around between Iran, especially Tehran, going into Iraq, sometimes even going into Syria. And we'll see his experiences throughout these areas with different groups of people, and his thoughts about the war and about the culture of Iran, and various things related to that. Questions? Okay. So next week, you will still be doing the exam. So we're going to watch a film. And before the following week, please finish up to the end of chapter 2. Front matter refers to everything before chapter 1. So please read up to the end of chapter 2. Okay, so that's what we're doing next. Now, let's talk about that exam. The exam is an online open book take-home essay question in English. It will begin at noon when the bell rings. So first, let's take a look at these rules. Number 1, your answer must be an English essay with multiple non-itemized paragraphs, not a numbered or unnumbered list. So there are a number of ideas here. It has to be an essay. It has to be in English. And your essay cannot take the form of a list. So don't say don't give me like number 1, number 2, number 3, A, B, C. Even if you don't have the numbers or the letters, if each paragraph has like a subheading so that it looks like a list, don't do that either. I'll show you a negative, bad example down below. I will grade your essays according to accuracy, logic, and sources. So it's open book, which means you have to use the assigned readings. As I will tell you later, for each part of your answer, you have to tell me what page you found that information. That is, so if you use quotations, or if you paraphrase or summarize something from your chosen text, that quotation or paraphrase or summary must be accurate. That is accuracy. Logic is how do you get from this part of the text to your answer? What is the connection between what you see and what you think? Finally, source is, did you give me the correct page number, or for a poem, the correct line number? You will notice I am not grading your actual answer. These are open-ended questions. People can have different answers as long as you can trace your answers back to something that you read in your chosen text. Okay, number 2, the exams are open book. Give at least 4 different discontinuous pieces of specific evidence from your chosen assigned class reading to support your answer. So you need at least 4 quotations or paraphrase or summaries, and they must be specific. So you can't just give like a general idea and then a page number. It should be like, this person says this, or this thing happens, right? Something specific. And it must be discontinuous, which means you cannot use one piece of evidence 4 times. You cannot give me 4 continuous sentences as your 4 pieces of evidence. They must come from 4 different places in your chosen text. There's one exception. If you use continuous sentences and you explain why each sentence means a different thing, I may consider that to be different pieces of evidence. But if you're not sure, don't risk it. So that's the kind of evidence, but you must also give me the location of the evidence in parentheses next to each piece of evidence. So if you give me a quotation mark, blah, 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 quotation mark, parenthesis, page number, parenthesis. Please do not give me a list of references at the end. Don't say, I got this answer from this book, this book, this book. Tell me where for each piece of evidence. Okay? If you're talking about a story, give the page numbers. If you're talking about a poem, give the line numbers. And the author introductions don't count. Your evidence must come from the actual story or the actual poem. Number 3, it is open book. You can use any resource. So not just the assigned readings. You can go online, you can go to the library, you can talk with me. You can use any resource except other people. But you can ask the instructor questions. So the only person you can talk to is me. Not the person sitting next to you, not the person sitting behind you, not somebody who took this class last year, and not your grandmother, just me. If you do use additional information from other sources, please also give me the source and the name of the source, the web address if it has one, and the page number or timestamp for a video if it has one. Again, next to each piece of information in parentheses. Right? Again, don't give me a list of sources at the end. Give me for each different piece of evidence. Timestamp. So if you want to, you can go to YouTube and use YouTube videos as a source. But you have to tell me what time in the video. Number 4, if a piece of evidence or information does not have a location or source next to it, it will not be counted. So if your answer does not give me page numbers or timestamps, but at the end you say references, blah, 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 that's the same as not giving me any references. I will only look at the parenthesis next to each piece of information. Number 5, you can write your answer elsewhere and copy paste the text of your answer into Moodle. So there's no time limit. There's a deadline, but it's not like if you stay on Moodle for too long, it will log out. You can stay on Moodle as long as you want, but you don't have to. You can write your answer somewhere else and then paste it into the answer box. If you do that, please don't give me a link to a Google Doc. Somebody did this before, so I now have to warn you guys. Please copy the text of your answer and paste it into Moodle. You can submit as many answers as you want, and I will only give you the highest grade. So like, if you submit, and then you go take a shower, and in the middle of washing your hair, you think, wait, I forgot to say something. You can submit a new answer, and I will only give you the best of the best grade from the two answers. Number 6, if you do not answer the question, so like you misunderstand the question, you answer something else, you don't answer the question, or if you answer it in the wrong format, so like you give me a list or you don't use English, or you plagiarize in your answer, which means you use information from other places and you don't tell me where it's from, and I catch you, you will get a 0. So all the stuff I've been saying, if you don't follow like number 1 and if you break number 4 and you like steal ideas, that's an automatic 0. Plagiarism includes even the smallest thing. So in the past, I've had students say, oh, I copied the introduction from Wikipedia, but it's just an introduction. There's no like important information there. No, any part of your answer, if you take it from somewhere else, put it in quotation marks if it's a quotation, and tell me where you found it. If I catch you, then it's plagiarism. Finally, number 7, AI gives terrible answers, and you may not see why they are terrible, but I can see. So you can use AI if you want to, but it's at your own risk. Some of you might be thinking, oh, I can use AI to clean up my grammar, add some vocabulary. You can, but this is not an English class. I'm not going to be grading your grammar and vocabulary. And you will have the additional risk that AI might change your page numbers. This has happened to students of mine before. They got a low grade. They asked me why. I said, your page numbers are wrong. And then he said, oh, they were right, but then I gave it to AI, and when it came back, the numbers changed. So if you want to use AI, you can, but if bad things happen, you can only blame yourself. And then finally, okay, well, so far, for these 7 points, do you have questions? Okay, the 8th point is, we now have a new version of Moodle this year. For the old versions, when I give you a grade on Moodle, I will also leave a comment explaining the grade, or if I don't have a comment, it's because you got a perfect score. But in any case, Moodle will not notify you that you got a grade. You will have to log on to check for yourself. However, this year, we have a new version of Moodle. And if you go to notifications and click on the setting button, you will see one thing called, where is it? This, lesson essay graded notification. I think this means that when your essay is graded, it will notify you. I don't know, I haven't tried this before. I'm not a student, I can't get that notification. But if you go and make sure this is turned on, you may or may not get a notification. If you do get a notification, please tell me. I want to know. But if you don't get a notification, you might have to remember to log on and check your grade yourself. You can check your grade here. Click on grades. Don't need that. And right, here's your names, here's your numbers, and then you have grades for each item, midterm, final, extra credit. This is where I will put your grades. midterm plus final. I think there's one more. No, midterm plus final will equal 100, the highest score. Midterm is 40, final is 60. Okay, so I'm thinking that most of you have not taken an essay question exam in English before, right? So I have given you some examples to consider. The first one is a bad example of what not to do. And these examples are all about other things that you have not read. The ideas here will not help you, but you can look at how other people created their answers, what the answers look like. So this is the bad example. You'll notice a few things. First of all, it has subtitles for each section. I consider this a list. You should not use lists. Don't do that. You will also see there are no page numbers, no line numbers, no locations of any kind. We don't have any source for any of this information. So those are the two main mistakes you should avoid. If you read closely, you will also see that each paragraph is very general. There is no specific information. There is no specific moments in the text. The evidence is too broad. It doesn't really count as specific evidence. Okay, so you can go home and take a look at this in more detail. I have therefore paired it with a good example for the same question. So first, it opens by answering the question. Very clear answer. It has quotations, right? Quotation mark, and it has a location. This text is a play, so this means scene 1, lines 39 to 46. So again, for each piece of information, there is a quotation, there is a location. You will see that this person says first chance, second chance, third chance. This is not a list because it is part of the essay. It is not a separate subtitle, so this is fine. And it's all about the same idea. It's all supporting this person's answer. So yes, if you want to see a good answer, you can take a look at that one. And I also want to point you to, oh no, I don't have that one. Okay, yeah. So these are some other good examples that you can consider to think about how to design your answer. Questions so far? Okay, so as you can see, the timer says, or the deadline says, beginning October 20th at noon, ending October 27th, just before midnight. That's next week. So next week, you will still be doing the exam. So instead, we're going to watch a film. That way, you don't have to read something new while you're still taking the exam. But after the exam ends, you do have to start reading the novel up to the end of chapter 2. Let's take a look at the exam question. So first of all, you will see this really, really big answer box. Don't worry about filling up the answer box. It is an infinite box. It will keep growing when you fill it. It's just to encourage you to say more. Okay, the question. Answer one of the following questions. If you answer both, I will give you the higher grade. Number 1, choose 2 of the short texts that we read in week 2. Despite their different authors, backgrounds, or even genres like poetry, fiction, essay, how do you think they might be similar? Give at least 4 points of comparison, which means at least 8 pieces of evidence. Each point of comparison should have 1 piece of evidence from one text and one piece of evidence from the other text. That's how you compare. So 4 comparisons means 8 pieces of evidence. Or you can do number 2. Choose one of the texts that we have read starting from week 3. Do you think this text is written more for a domestic reader or for an international reader, and why? Domestic in this case means from the author's home culture. So like if you're talking about the taste of apples, domestic would mean Taiwanese reader, international would mean everybody else. For this question, you must choose either domestic or international. You cannot give equal weight to both. So your answer cannot say, oh, I think it's written for domestic audience and an international audience. The author is thinking about both. You have to choose one. You cannot give both equal weight. Obviously, if an author writes for an international audience, some people in their home culture will also read the story. That is not what the question is asking. The question is asking, is it more for a domestic or international reader? So it's not absolute. It's one more than the other. Questions about the exam? Okay, so for the rest of today, you can begin thinking about these questions. You can talk to me, but not to your classmates. Good luck.